The Daily Code Snippet. Making your forms accessible. In an earlier episode, we learned about the label element. It is used to indicate to the user what data is being sought from them. Here is an example of its use. Here we have a form element. Within the form element are three input types. One is for the user's first name, one is for the user's last name, and the final is a submit input. The first name and last name inputs both have labels. The label element is also added for accessibility. A screen reader will read out the label when the user focuses on the input element. In addition, users who have difficulty clicking in a small region will be assisted by the label element because it can toggle checkboxes and radio buttons when the text is clicked. The for attribute in the label element is used to bind the label to the ID attribute of the input element. So in this case, the first label with the for attribute of first name will attach that label to the first input, which has an ID attribute of first name. This way, the user knows that the first input is for them to enter their first name. It is important to provide label elements to tag all form controls. This includes all types of form inputs that include text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, and drop-down menus. Positioning of the label is also important since maintaining a consistent placement increases predictability and users have expectations for how form elements work. So in left to right languages, it is customary to place labels to the right of the radio buttons and checkboxes, while to the left and above other form fields. Placing labels above form fields reduces horizontal scrolling for those with low vision and those on mobile. The goal should be to maintain a visual relationship between the label and the form field. Sometimes you may want to hide label text to avoid redundancy if sighted users are able to determine the label through visual cues. In this case, you can add CSS to create a class and hide the label element. Here is an example. It has a for attribute for search that binds it to the input for search. But it also has a submit button that has a text associated with it that also says search. It is not necessary to add the additional text search because the submit button is already labeled search. However, someone using a screen reader would need to have the input element identified to them as a search element. Another way of handling this would be to add an ARIA label attribute to identify the input rather than a label element. So here the ARIA label for search is added directly to the input, and we don't need a separate label element for our search submit button. A third way is to use ARIA labeled by attribute. The value of the ID attribute of the button element is used by the ARIA labeled by attribute. A third way is to use the ARIA labeled by attribute. The value of the ID attribute of the button element is used by the ARIA labeled by attribute. So here we have an input element with an ARIA labeled by attribute that has a value of search button. This is the same value for the ID attribute of the button element. Using the title attribute as a replacement for the label element is not recommended. This method has inconsistent support by assistive technologies. This is likely because the title attribute for the input element can be used for non-essential information like a tooltip when hovering over a form field for sighted users. So here you can see that we have a title attribute for search attached to the input element and a button element. Sometimes you need to enclose the input element within the label element as an implicit label because the ID attribute of the form field may not be known if it is being generated by a script. So here we have two input types where we have a first name input and a last name input. Neither has an ID attribute to which we can bind the label for attributes. So in this case, the label element contains the text for first name as well as the input for first name. There's a carriage return, and then you have a second label element with the last name text and an input element for last name. Presented by Designers Learn Code.